Back then, my family owned a restaurant. A group of customers came to eat and got drunk. When my wife was serving food, she had to bend down. As she did, her neckline sagged. One of the drunk men reached into her neckline and pinched her. My wife screamed and instinctively slapped him. However, the drunk man, feeling embarrassed in front of others, hit her, leaving her face bloody. When I pushed open the door to the private room, I saw my wife covered in blood. I was furious and scolded the drunk man, but he punched me in the jaw, biting off my tongue. Enraged, I retaliated by pinning his arm to the table and chopping it off with a cleaver. I chopped the hand that had touched my wife. Just as I was about to slit his throat, my wife grabbed me, crying and begging me to stop. She managed to reduce my sentence to probation by spending all our savings. All this happened because the man first got drunk, harassed my wife, and broke my tongue. We tried to seek justice, but it didn't work. When I pinned the man's arm down, he sobered up and apologized, saying he wouldn't do it again. However, I couldn't control my anger and chopped off his arm anyway. The dozen or so people at the table testified against me, and the judge ruled that I had used excessive force. We sold our house and restaurant, losing all our savings. We used the remaining money to start a small eatery selling Fujian snacks. My leg was fitted with an ankle monitor, restricting my freedom. My wife stood by me, often teasing me, saying my fish balls tasted better than the dishes I used to make. Every time I sold the first batch while wearing the monitor, she'd happily say, "You're great, we made $5. Our nightmare wasn't over. One day, the same drunk man came back. Even though my restaurant had turned into a small eatery, he still came to dine. Feeling my gaze, he rudely said, "Looking at me? Do you still want to compensate me for a house?" I suppressed my anger because I couldn't afford to fight. I was still on probation and my wife was pregnant. If I got into another fight, I'd immediately go to jail. We had encountered him before, but we always kept our distance. This time, he was clearly drunk again and ordered a serving of fish balls, asking for pepper powder to be added. When my wife handed him the packaged fish balls, he shouted at her, saying, "I told you to add pepper, are you deaf?" His voice was loud, and she was startled. She nervously replied, "I did add it. You just didn't see it." I visibly saw her add the pepper, but he was busy with his phone at the time. She opened the lid for him to see, but he suddenly pushed her hand away, and the scalding hot fish balls splattered onto her body. He cursed, "Add it, did you?" The hot fish balls scalded her, causing her to cry out in pain. She hastily pulled up her clothes, revealing her swollen belly. She opened the tap and poured icy water over herself. I grabbed the cleaver, ready to rush out. My mom, who was helping with the cash register, saw me and quickly ran to the kitchen, locking the door to keep me inside. She pleaded through the service window, "Don't come out. You can't fight again. We can't afford it anymore. He's drunk and probably just wants to provoke you." My wife saw me moving and forced a smile, enduring the pain and cold. She said, "I'm fine. It didn't scald me." How could she not have been scalded? I saw her belly turning red, and she had to keep rinsing herself with cold water. She was clearly in pain but wanted to calm me down first. The drunk man, reeking of alcohol, shouted at her, "It's obvious you didn't add anything. I'm sick of your nonsense." My wife continued to rinse herself with cold water. She was 8 months pregnant and couldn't withstand the cold. Her body was shaking as she cried and told the drunk man, "I really did add it. We have surveillance. Look if you don't believe me." The drunk man impatiently said, "You dare argue with me?" He walked into the packing area and violently pushed my wife, who nearly fell over. My mom quickly supported her, saying, "How can you hit her? We won't serve you anymore." The drunk man grew angrier and demanded, "I paid my money. Make me another serving." I coldly watched him and forcefully knocked on the serving window, holding the cleaver. People who bully others when drunk are everywhere, but they never give out red envelopes drunk or bully tattooed men. They claim drunkenness as an excuse, but they always target the weak. The drunk man saw me with the cleaver and wanted to run, but then he noticed the kitchen door was locked by my mom. He sneered, "You're hiding in the kitchen trying to scare me? Come out if you're brave." I didn't say a word. Seeing me silent, the drunk man sneered, "You're using a knife to intimidate me, but you're too afraid to speak." Then, he raised his right hand and pulled up his sleeve, revealing a deep scar. He said, "I'm similar. My hand was chopped off by you, though it was reattached, but it's useless and no one wants to hire me." I pointed to the lock, implying if he was brave, he should unlock it and come in to fight. My wife knew my temper, so she endured the cold and pain, pleading with the drunk man to calm down. She was clearly gritting her teeth in pain, her belly moving. The cold water had lowered her body temperature, and the baby in her womb seemed uncomfortable, visibly kicking her belly. The drunk man suddenly vomited on the floor, wiped his mouth, and pointed at my wife's belly, saying, "Isn't it disgusting? Can't you cover it up? The hair on your belly makes me sick." My mom was furious and said, "It's normal for pregnant women to have hair on their bellies." The drunk man replied, "Stop talking about drunken tantrums being harmful. Looking at your disgusting belly is what's harming me." My wife quickly covered her belly with a cold cloth and appeasingly said, "I'll refund your money and offer you a free meal. Please, dear, let me go change." As she headed to the storage room, the drunk man suddenly grabbed her hair and yanked her back. He became agitated and surprisingly asked my wife, "Why offer to treat me? Can't I afford one bowl of your fish balls?" My wife quickly explained, "I didn't mean it like that." However, the drunk man seemed offended, took out his wallet, pulled out $200, and slapped it against my wife's face, yelling, "Can't I afford it?" My hand, holding the cleaver, trembled with rage. My wife spoke with tears, "I meant no disrespect. It's an honor to treat you." The drunk man mocked her, saying, "A pregnant woman calling herself a sister? You're an old wife about to have a baby." He sneered, "Do you think I'm so down on my luck that I can't even afford a bowl of fish balls since I only have one arm?" My wife replied, "I truly didn't mean it that way." The drunk man scoffed, "If you didn't mean it, then kneel down and apologize to me." The drunk man shouted and suddenly grabbed my wife's shoulder, forcing her to kneel down. As a pregnant woman, she couldn't withstand the pressure and was pressed to the ground. Her knees hit the floor with a thud, causing her to cry out in pain. He grabbed her hair and snarled, "You're so proud. Just because I touched you once, you ruined my life." He grew angrier and pressed his disabled hand onto her chest, causing her to scream as he looked up at me, wildly yelling, "Come on, cut off my hand again." I kicked the door fiercely. The door shook, but the lock held strong. My wife's gaze was filled with a plea, not for help but for me not to act impulsively. The drunk man did all this while ensuring he had a clear path to the door. Earlier, when he saw me with the knife, he wanted to run away. Though drunk, his actions were deliberate. He would escape as soon as I came out, and I'd immediately be sent to jail. In his eyes, I was like an enraged dog, constrained by my probation. He made sure there was no barrier between us and the door. As soon as I stepped out with a knife, he would run away. He didn't need me to catch him. Just the act of chasing would be enough. My mom was furious. She grabbed her phone and threatened to call the police. Ethan laughed loudly, saying, "Go ahead and report me. I'm already ruined thanks to your son. I can't find work or a wife. I'm not afraid of having a record. Even if I get arrested today, I'll still come after you when I get out." He was right. Groping isn't a felony unless it's severe. As long as someone doesn't care about their future, they can just do it and face only minor punishment like a few days in detention. Even if he scalded Sophia, he could claim it was an accident. But I'm different. I couldn't even slap him without going to jail, not with his actions right in front of me. Just then, Sophia suddenly collapsed, clutching her belly in pain. My mom rushed over, worried and asking, "What's wrong?" Sophia's face was pale, with no color in her lips. She was shaking and grabbing my mom's arm, saying, "My belly!" I frantically kicked the door. My mom rushed to call an ambulance, but Ethan snatched the phone away. "What do you think you're doing?" he snapped. My mom cried, "Ethan, I know you have a grudge against my son, but please let us take my daughter-in-law to the hospital. She's pregnant." Ethan shrugged indifferently, saying, "It's not my kid. Why should I care?" Enraged, I kicked the door repeatedly, but it wouldn't budge. Ethan thought for a moment before smiling and saying, "Want to take your wife to the hospital? Huh? Fine, I paid my money. Make me another bowl of fish balls, and I'll let her go." I roared in anger, though I couldn't form complete sentences. Sophia endured her pain and weakly told me, "Make it for him." She looked at me pleadingly, pointing to her belly, hoping I'd calm down for the sake of our child. I clenched my teeth and tossed the fish balls into the pot. Sophia sat in a chair, wincing in pain as cold sweat dripped down her face. Ethan seemed amused, saying with a chuckle, "I'm not unreasonable." Take the fish balls and we're even. This time, remember to add pepper. I placed the fish balls on the serving counter. My mom quickly sprinkled pepper on them, asking, "Are you satisfied now?" Ethan nodded, pointing at me and saying, "Throw out all the knives from the kitchen, and I'll let you leave to take her to the hospital." I gritted my teeth and put all the knives on the counter. Ethan glanced at my mom and said, "What's taking so long?" My mom gathered the knives, impatiently asking, "Can my daughter-in-law go to the hospital now?" Ethan took a fish ball, blew on it, and popped it into his mouth. Still chewing, he said, "Okay, open the door." He picked up the knives and walked to the door, opening the storm drain cover and tossing the knives into it. My mom quickly unlocked the door as I prepared to exit. However, Ethan returned. He munched on the fish ball, mumbling, "You added too much pepper," and seized Sophia's face, forcing her to open her mouth. He leaned down and spat the chewed fish ball into her mouth. Sophia felt nauseous and tried to vomit, but he covered her mouth and nose, shouting, "Is it too much? Try some." He forced her to swallow the chewed fish ball, and she started vomiting violently, her belly visibly contracting in pain. Ethan laughed, approaching me with his hands open in a gesture of innocence. "If you're unhappy, you can hit me," he said. "But I told my family to call the police if I don't come back." I clenched my fists. Sophia, however, hugged my arm and weakly said, "Don't. You're about to become a dad. Don't be impulsive. For me and our child." Ethan chimed in, smiling, "Yes, you're on probation, so don't act rashly, or you'll end up in jail." He leaned into my ear and whispered, "If you go to jail, I'll make sure someone messes with your wife." You can guess what I mean by mess with that. My breathing quickened with anger. He continued to taunt me, saying he would come every day even if I didn't fight back. Sophia cried, saying, "Can't you just leave us alone? You were the one who started everything." Ethan coldly replied, "I admit I was wrong, but when I apologized and offered to pay, your husband cut off my hand anyway. My hand is useless now and you ruined my life. I won't let you off easy." I picked up Sophia and headed outside. She was right, now wasn't the time to argue. I was about to become a dad, and I couldn't go to jail. I needed to take care of Sophia and Olivia. Sophia suddenly screamed. As I was carrying her, I glanced down to see Ethan leaning forward and licking her leg. He locked eyes with me, sticking out his tongue to lick his lips, saying with a laugh, "Women love being licked. Since you don't have a tongue, I'll do it for you." My anger was boiling over, but I knew I couldn't act impulsively. Sophia's safety was paramount, and any misstep could cost us both our lives. No matter how enraged I was, Sophia's safety was more important. Ethan was fully aware of what he was doing. At first, he didn't restrict Sophia's movement, deliberately being disgusting to us. Since he didn't control her freedom, I couldn't claim it was self-defense in an emergency. He followed me, even reaching out to touch Sophia's belly, saying with a grin, "Be good, little one. Once you come out, I'll visit you often at daycare." I held back my urgent breathing and made it to the door. Thankfully, a taxi was passing by, so I quickly hailed it. My mom anxiously told the driver, "Hurry and take my daughter-in-law to the hospital." I opened the door and let my mom and Sophia get in. However, I didn't join them. Noticing I wasn't getting in, my mom became anxious. She rolled down the window and urged me, "Get in! Don't fight him. Just come with us to the hospital." I looked at my mom's anxious face and shook my head. Sophia painfully told me, "We won't open this store anymore. We'll sell it tomorrow and move away so he can't find us." I forced a smile and walked to the other side of the taxi. As the window rolled down, I leaned in and kissed Sophia's forehead before waving goodbye to the driver. Sophia understood my intention and began to sob uncontrollably. The taxi drove off, and Ethan spat on the ground, saying, "How boring. I'm going home." I extended my hand and grabbed Ethan's shoulder. He smiled slyly, as if he had succeeded in some scheme, and turned around to apologize. "I'm sorry, buddy. This apology wasn't for me. It was for the police." He knew my shop had surveillance, and if I attacked him after his apology, the evidence would show he had stopped provoking me, and I would still be considered a violent offender. I pulled him back into the store. With no knives around, he seemed unconcerned, grinning at me. "Want to hit me? Come on, my family has called the police. If you don't hit me today, you're a coward." I spoke slowly and with difficulty, saying, "You will die." Ethan burst out laughing, saying, "What are you talking about? Do you need to straighten out your tongue before speaking? I didn't argue. I just dragged him back into the store. Ethan's actions were driven by spite. He wanted to provoke me into attacking him so he could send me to jail while ensuring his safety. He sat down saying, "The police will arrive soon. If you're angry, then hit me. I won't fight back." As he spoke, his confidence began to wane. I glanced at him and grabbed the rolling door, pulling it shut. Seeing me lock the door, Ethan's smile faded, and he became nervous, asking, "Why are you closing the door?" I struggled to speak, saying, "I don't want you running away." He panicked, lost his composure, and rushed to the kitchen to check. When he found no knives there, he relaxed and noticed all the chairs were plastic, which made him regain his smug demeanor. Ethan taunted me, saying, "What's with the act? You think you're tough without knives? Come on. Before the police arrive, try beating me to death with your bare hands." I grabbed a store poster and pulled it down, revealing a fire extinguisher case behind it. I opened the case and pulled out a large fire axe. As I approached Ethan, his confident expression faltered. He was so frightened that he ran into the kitchen and slammed the door shut, yelling through the service window, "Hey, calm down. You're about to become a father. I won't bother you again." I was wrong. I really know I was wrong. His panic was so intense that he forgot the kitchen door was locked from the outside. I, axe in hand, kicked open the door. I love Sophia deeply. I know what this means, but I'm willing to let her down. There's an old saying, "Endure for a moment and you'll have peace. Take a step back and the sky is vast." But that doesn't apply to me. If I choose to endure today, the rest of my life would feel like a pointless journey as a walking corpse. Ethan will keep coming back, drunk, to harass Sophia and frighten our child. Living such a humiliating life is worse than dying. Ethan was terrified. He hadn't expected this outcome. In a panic, he grabbed anything he could from the kitchen and threw it at me. Steaming balls, sponge cloths, a steamer basket. I continued towards him undeterred. Desperate, Ethan finally picked up a wok from the kitchen. The wok had no handle, only metal rings for lifting. He tried to use it as a shield, but his right hand was uncoordinated, making it impossible to hold the heavy wok steady. I swung the axe down. The wok was gashed open, and his fingers, not securely clasped in the rings, were crushed and broke off. Ethan collapsed, screaming in agony as he clutched his broken fingers. He cried, "I've been punished. My fingers are broken. I've been punished enough. I was wrong." It seemed his immobilized fingers still had sensation. He crawled, sobbing uncontrollably, but I approached him with the axe. In his terrified gaze, I should have looked like the bringer of death. Ethan cried so hard that tears and snot streamed down his face. He didn't dare look at the axe and instead showed me his bent fingers, pleading, "I just touched your wife. My fingers are broken. This punishment is excessive. I swear I won't bother you again. We'll leave each other alone from now on." I swung the axe again, just as he held out his hand. The sharp blade severed the two broken fingers, and his hand began to gush blood. He shuddered, clutching the stumps, trying futilely to stop the bleeding. Ethan saw his fingers severed and screamed in terror. Despite his broken fingers, he frantically tried to crawl but slipped on a puddle of water, part of the fishball soup he had spilled earlier. I struggled to speak, saying, "If you don't die, I won't sleep." I raised the axe again, targeting his head. Ethan lifted his hands in defense. The axe cut through his palm and down his arm, splitting it in two until it hit his elbow joint. The axe stopped there, halted by the bone. I sighed. How foolish, he could have died more easily. I pulled out the axe and coldly watched Ethan. Despite his severe injuries, adrenaline seemed to kick in, allowing him to scream wildly and scramble to his feet. He rushed towards the metal door, which I had already closed. Panicked, Ethan slammed his body into the door, creating a large dent but failing to open it. The door only cracked at the bottom. I had never seen anything so foolish. Ethan fell, bleeding from his head, and pleaded with me, crying uncontrollably, "I knew I was wrong. I just got drunk today and thought of past grievances. I didn't expect you to really try to kill me." I looked at him coldly, unresponsive. His terror intensified with my silence. Despite his agony, he kowtowed to me, each bow hitting the ground with a thud. He begged, "I won't bother you again. Please spare my life. I want to live. I swear I'll never touch alcohol again." Ethan's arrogance turned to humility. His fear was so intense that he had wet himself. I sat on a chair, watching him calmly, uncertain whether to finish him off. If I swung the axe again, I'd likely face execution and never see Sophia or Olivia again. But I couldn't trust him. If I showed mercy now, he would exact brutal revenge on my family once I was in jail. Thinking this, I gripped the axe tighter. I'd rather die than do something so foolish. If I end up in jail, I'll be unable to protect Sophia and Olivia. Seeing me raise the axe again, Ethan's body began to shake violently. He cried out frantically, "Why won't you spare me? I've apologized so many times. Why must you kill me?" I whispered quietly, "I don't trust your words." Ethan's mental state collapsed, and he became like a madman, frantically crying as he tried to squeeze through the small gap at the bottom of the door. The gap was barely large enough for a cat to pass through, but he was desperate. As he put his head through the gap, his body followed, ignoring his severely injured arm. In his agony, he tried to push the door upwards but didn't notice that the rolling door was partially off the step due to his earlier impact. Like many storefronts, this one had a step. The door, installed by my landlord, was aligned with the step's edge. As Ethan forced himself out, the door's position shifted further off the step. His throat was pressed against the edge of the step, trapping him so he could neither inhale nor exhale. Even through the door, I could hear the strange noises from his throat. He wanted to scream but couldn't because his airway was blocked. I tried to move the door but discovered it was jammed from the earlier impact. Ethan repeatedly tried to use his neck to lift the door for air, but it was impossible, both because the door was stuck and due to its weight. At first, Ethan's body could still struggle, pounding against the door, but as time passed, his strength waned. It was late at night. The streets weren't empty, but there were fewer people than during the day. I watched as he struggled for over a minute before passers-by finally noticed him. A crowd gathered, unable to open the door, and eventually chose to break it open. After the rolling door was broken, I finally saw Ethan's condition. His face was purplish-black with a deep gash on his neck. As he struggled to turn over, I saw his eyes had dimmed, and then he vomited a large amount of black blood. There was no sign of breathing after that. The black blood splattered onto his eyes, and he didn't even blink. It seemed that after his airway was crushed, a massive amount of blood entered his lungs. He couldn't cough or swallow, leading to asphyxiation. I knew he died horribly, but passers-by didn't focus on his condition. Instead, they stared at the bloody axe in my hand and his divided arm. People screamed and began running wildly. I sighed and sat by the body, glancing at the deep gash on his neck, which had pressed through his skin, exposing his throat. I pulled out my phone and called the police, saying with difficulty, "I'm turning myself in." After hanging up, I sent a message to Sophia, telling her how much I love her. Just as I sent, "I love her," my mom messaged me, crying that she had given birth to a baby girl and everything was fine. She begged me not to do anything rash again. Looking at the body beside me, I smiled bitterly. My mom's advice came too late. Soon, I was arrested by the police. Despite having a child, I couldn't see her. My family was finding a lawyer to help me, and all I could do was tell the truth to the police. The surveillance in the store had captured everything. The bad news was that I broke the law and would go to jail, but the good news was that I wouldn't face the death penalty. The judge sentenced me to 7 years. This meant that even if I was released early, my child would already be in preschool. In court, the judge asked if I had anything to say. I said I felt unlucky. He asked if I regretted my actions, and I said yes. That's what my lawyer had advised me to say. Actually, I didn't regret anything. If faced with the same situation again, I would react the same way. However, in court, I acted sincerely, saying I was sorry and hoped for another chance to reform and become a useful member of society. After the verdict, the judge asked if I wanted to appeal. I thought for a moment and decided to appeal, but it was unsuccessful, and the original sentence was upheld. Life in prison was better than in the detention center, and I finally saw my daughter for the first time when she was 6 months old. Sophia forced a smile, saying no one was bothering us anymore and asking me to take care of myself in prison, promising to wait for me. I smiled bitterly and told her that I had dragged her and our child down. It would take too long to wait for me. If things didn't work out, she should remarry. Sophia shook her head repeatedly, saying she would never remarry and would wait for me with our child. However, time is crueler than promises. At first, we would regularly exchange letters and make phone calls whenever Sophia could visit me. Later, Sophia began to complain that raising Olivia alone was exhausting and life seemed pointless. All I could do was try to comfort her. 2 years into my sentence, our letter exchanges significantly decreased, and our phone calls only revolved around Olivia's well-being. For years into my sentence, Sophia visited me without Olivia. She brought a divorce agreement. I understood her situation. Life was tough without me, and Olivia was now old enough to remember. Sophia cried and asked for forgiveness. I nearly cried but held back, realizing her decision was correct. Even if I was released, I wouldn't be able to find a good job to support her. I signed the divorce agreement. By the time I was released, Sophia had moved away with our child. She sincerely sent a letter, saying Olivia was happy with her new stepfather and asking me not to disturb her life. She wished me well in finding a new family. As I sat reading Sophia's letter, I stared blankly. She was no longer my wife but my ex-wife. I often wonder if my original decision was worth it. Those left behind when someone goes to prison face a heavy burden. Perhaps I could have chosen to move or compromise earlier. In moments of passion, people think they can pay the price, but emotions can't withstand time's erosion. I once had a happy family, but now I have nothing. It's better to stay calm during conflicts and remember the principle of giving in when possible. I really thought I wouldn't regret it, but I do regret it. I wrote down my story, and my ending is absurd yet realistic. Nothing in life is insurmountable. Don't break the law and don't let impulsiveness dictate your fate.